estar presente en esta rueda de prensa que comparto con el comisario de la Unión Europea, Virginijus Sinkevicius, responsable de Medio Ambiente, Océanos y Pesca, y como conclusión de esta reunión que hemos mantenido hoy del Consejo Informal de Ministros y Ministras de Pesca de la Unión Europea. Ha sido una sesión muy interesante donde nos ha permitido escuchar la voz de las asociaciones pesqueras representativas del sector, pero también de las instituciones, del presidente de la Comisión de Pesca del Parlamento Europeo, por supuesto de la Comisión Europea y del conjunto de los Estados miembros, de los ministros y ministras y de las delegaciones que hemos intervenido en este debate sobre un tema de tanto interés para el presente y futuro de nuestro sector pesquero como es el de la descarbonización del sector pesquero y de los buques pesqueros de aquí al año 2050. Doy la palabra al comisario para que haga algunos comentarios al respecto y yo después añadiré los que correspondan como presidencia española de la Unión Europea. Comisario, querido Virginijus.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all. And first of all, let me use this opportunity to thank all stakeholders and ministers, and especially Minister Planas, for the very fruitful discussion that we have had today. I also welcome the program of the Spanish presidency, which sets decarbonization as a priority. The energy transition in fisheries is one of the pillars of the Fisheries and Ocean package put forward by the Commission in February, and I'm pleased that the topic gets the wide attention and rightfully deserves by all actors who can contribute to this process. And I'm glad that we are discussing this topic here in beautiful Vigo, where fisheries are part of the livelihood and identity of the city and its people. The last year and a half has been especially difficult for the fisheries sector and the coastal communities living off it. Russia's aggression against Ukraine, raising costs in fossil fuels have impacted the fleet's revenue, significantly reducing profits. Since then, European Commission has accelerated its plans to break the strong dependency of EU fishing fleets on fossil fuels. And transitioning towards clean energy sources will be key to protect fishers against future energy crises. But it's not just that. It will also help us build a more resilient sector capable of attracting younger generation. And this transition is also crucial for reaching the goal of climate neutrality by 2050. However, we cannot deny the many challenges ahead of us before we can fully use renewable technologies in fisheries. And I hear concerns, in particular with regard to financing the transition and as regards the capacity on board fishing vessels needed to accommodate new technological solutions. As regards funding, the EU has a wide range of funding and financing instruments that can be used for research and innovation demonstration. What's very important is also, of course, to attract the private funds so that they could help with scaling up the technologies. We are preparing by the end of this year a guide to help all the actors find the right funding opportunities, and we will organize a financing workshop in November to answer all the questions. By the end of the 2024, the Commission will carry out an ex-post evaluation of the EMFF for the periods of 2014-2020, and a midterm evaluation of the current MFAF program for 2021-2027. So these evaluations, they will also give us additional opportunities, providing insights in the reflection on the scope, objectives and tools of the structural support policy for maritime affairs, fisheries and aquaculture post-2027. I also recognize the concern with fishing capacity ceilings. Some of the technologies truly they need, that are needed for energy transition, they require more volume on board than the traditional alternatives, and we have to find a solution to every challenge together, starting by using all margins and flexibilities that already exist. But Commission is not going away from the dialogue looking at the possibilities. Our legislation has to be future-looking legislation, not hindering technological progress. The diversity of the sector is additional challenge, but it also means that no one-size-fits-all approach. So small-scale, artisanal fishing, large-scale vessels, and aquaculture operations all have different needs. At EU level, we have launched the Energy Transition Partnership to share knowledge, help find solutions, and coordinate efforts. And I call on all stakeholders to join. Despite the challenges, as confirmed by our discussion today, I truly believe we can transition towards a more resilient, environmentally responsible fishing industry that contributes to regional development and job creation in the EU. I was very pleased in the morning to hear representatives of the industry. Their share of optimism, of course, as I said, many challenges from funding to infrastructure, skills, which we will have to overcome together. But I think it also gives a tremendous opportunity for the sector's modernization. And then in the afternoon session, we also hear that member states as well, with certain questions, with certain worries, but they are committed. And I think this is another confirmation that there is a great opportunities ahead of us. We just have to unlock them all together. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'd like to make some additional comments on behalf of the Presidency of the Council. I took notes during our discussion this morning. I think my first conclusion is that all ministers agreed that we need to come up with a common strategy to decarbonize the European fishing fleet, both the artisanal and industrial fleet. We need to decarbonize aquaculture as well. We think that this strategy should reflect a whole host of priorities and objectives, and we need to accompany this with sustainable investment. The aim being to renovate and upgrade our fishing fleet, make sure that we build new vessels that are more energy efficient. We also need to have technological innovation in the shipbuilding industry, and we also need to make sure that we train the crews, the fishers, aquaculture workers, so as to face the new challenges. During the discussion, we also highlighted the problem in finding alternative energies to fossil fuels. And this, of course, has a greater impact on the fishing fleet, especially the vessels that fish well away from the coast to medium and long range. And we need the contribution of experts, universities, research centers, both public and private. We need their contribution to this. As the Commissioner just said now, quite rightly, we also thought about how we can use the different funds in order to finance these measures, whether it's the MFF or other funds. Keeping in mind that the majority of ministers believe that we need public financial support to achieve this transition, without prejudice to the fact, as the Commissioner quite said, that private investment is also necessary. And we do hope that private investment will play a role here. And then I would also like to thank the European Commission for saying that regulation must be part of our thinking. They are aware of this, especially when we talk about fishing capacity. This is an important part of the current common fishery policy. Decarbonization means that we have to rethink our fishing capacity. And of course, the fishing capacity is a constraint as the Commissioner said, and the Commission is willing to analyze the situation to see where there is a bottleneck. We also spent part of our discussion on another topic that is vital to the sector, namely the generational renewal. This morning, we listened to the European Network of Women in Fisheries. We need more women to join the sector because, for example, the area set aside for the crews and for their rest areas have to be part and parcel of the capacities that we need to work on. So, to conclude, this informal council in Vigo has afforded us an excellent opportunity to exchange ideas and come up with some conclusions that will benefit the sector and help us attenuate climate change and achieve net zero by 2050. It's not going to be easy, and it's not something we can do overnight. As the Commissioner just said, now we have new deadlines this year and in the years to come. But we see a possibility now of not only making progress in energy transition in the years to come, but also rethink fisheries for the 21st century. And I think this is something very positive. We need the fishing sector to provide us with excellent quality protein, to feed not only Europe but also the world. So we need to give them the necessary wherewithal and support to continue their activity. So I think today's discussion, as well as the visits that we carried out, as well as the contacts that we've had here in Vigo, have allowed us to make progress in this direction. So I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Commission, and the Commission in particular, for being so involved in this meeting, and I'd like to thank him for being here today. So we're open for questions.
When you ask a question, then please introduce yourself with your name and the media outlet that you're working for.
Daniel Rivera de Industrias Pesqueras. Me gustaría preguntarle.
From Industrias Pesqueras, Commissioner Sinkevicius, picking up on what you were saying in your comments now, with about a possible revision of the MFAF, would that then allow new boats to be financed with community funding?
We touched upon MFAF and the funding of the vessels. I think, it's not really an opportunity to fund new vessels from the MFAF because it's just too small of a fund. And especially when we're talking about the midterm review, that would be extremely difficult. I think MFAF can contribute in many ways of testing, scaling up technology, and etc. But building new boats from public money, it has been always a difficult discussion. I think we have to see how MFAF can contribute, how it can blend together with the private funds, but it's just too small of a fund to be dedicated to building new vessels. I think what's very important that in this energy transition we have to have a buy-in from the private sector, from the fisheries, but also the shipbuilders. And they're a crucial role to play, as well as financial institutions. If we're going to have an involvement of financial institutions, it would mean that they truly believe in this transition and they're ready to vouch behind it. So this is the, I would say, the scenario that we want to reach, and not really go into the pocket of MFAF. As you could see, we have many other priorities to fund from MFAF. One of them is our emergency measures, which we already had to activate in the past 2 years, 2 times, with the COVID crisis and with the spike of marine diesel.
Sí, quisiera añadir a las palabras del.
I'd like to add to what the Commissioner said. I fully agree with him. the scale of MFAF doesn't allow us to set different objectives for the fund than we have, even if we were to flesh out the fund. I think the aim of this midterm review of the MFF is precisely to try and highlight what we've discussed today, namely find additional sources of funding. And as the Commissioner said, we need to look at private investment, other financial institutions, as well as public funding. Now, we're not talking about the short term, more the medium and long term. And let's not forget that the MFF runs through to 2027. As of 2027, we will have a new MFF when we can discuss all of this at the beginning of the next European mandate, at the beginning of 2024-2025. So this is going to be part of the future political program, and we need to address issues such as this very important one, as funding in order to upscale our fishing fleet.
Sí, hola, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, Mercedes Sales from the FA agency. I have two questions for the Commissioner. Following on from what my colleague said and your answers, are you then thinking about creating a specific fund that would be for building ships, or an emergency fund, which has been suggested by the European Council? Secondly, a year ago in Galicia, there was something that really caused a great controversy. Then we had major problems with the fishing fleet here, and then there was a closure on the longline fisheries. What are you thinking of doing about that?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. So to begin again on MFAF and overall, there is no plans to create a new fund. We need to use existing tools, and as I said, the Commission will create a guidelines and will of course communicate them by the end of the year. We should look at the opportunities of other EU funds, not only MFAF, but even regional development funds, Horizon Europe funds, and especially through the Mission Oceans can be looked at. But also, I think an extremely important role must be here played by European Investment Bank, which should actually look at such projects which might have a slightly bigger risk to fund. Now, I think using all these opportunities, this is absolutely enough to create the momentum. As I said, the transition itself, at the end of the day, when we have scaled up solutions, they must be also funded by the sector. And then we, of course, look at how we best use the public funds. As I understand your second question from the translation, it was about the longliners and VMEs. So we received another advice, the scientific advice, which Commission is working on. And then again, as the previous year with the implementation of the VMEs, we will look at what could be the possible scenarios. We always evaluate socio-economic angle of possible prohibition or possible uses of bottom contacting gears. Longliners are part of it, according to the legislation. And then we will, of course, announce it how and which areas of Europe going to be affected and what changes are going to be made. We will keep in close touch, of course, on this with the national and local authorities, because a lot of information that in the end of the day is provided comes from the national scientific bodies which support the work of the ICES.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Soy Lara Graña de Faro de Vigo. Quería comentarle una.
I have a question for the Commissioner. Picking up on my colleague's question, Would you care to comment? Do you think that the EU legislation, following the entry into force of the regulation on the MVEs, do you think there are sufficient guarantees for security? Let's not forget that there was no prior socioeconomic impact assessment before it entered into force. And then another question about food security, especially following the invasion of Ukraine. Europe is importing more and more fish, more fisheries products from countries that are in the top group of top group of countries that are guilty of IUU.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. So let's go one by one. First of all, let me recall the situation on the VMEs. So 87 areas have been listed for VMEs protection in September 2022. And those areas are since then close to all bottom gears operating below 400 meters in EU waters. This is what's requested by the Deep Sea Access Regulation adopted in 2016. So we were almost 6 years, almost 7 years late into the adoption of the legislation. The 87 areas were listed based on the first ICES advice delivered in 2021 and on one of its scenarios which ensured a balance between the protection of the VMEs and the continuation of fishing activities. As I said, the socio-economic calculations which DG did, comparing different scenarios, comparing even the closures, and ensuring that the activities are the least affected. So we are now entering a new chapter for VMEs protection, which is the revision of the list established in 2022. And this is why the Commission has asked ICES to deliver the second advice. As it's finally delivered with some delay, now we are waiting for the scientific body's opinion, and as advice was issued only in April, so we expect the STEF's opinion at the end of July. So in September, Commission will pursue its consultation strategy by organizing a meeting with member states affected, advisory councils, stakeholders, to discuss the STEF's opinion and then foresee the next possible steps. Extremely important to note that especially longliners that has caused quite a number of debates, especially here in Spain. They were included in the legislation. So of course, when we implement legislation, we have to implement it fully. And legislation was adopted in 2016. Now going to your second question as regards food security. So we do not deny that fisheries plays an extremely important part, fisheries and aquaculture as regards the food security in Europe, especially in some regions. And they were heavily affected by, first of all, COVID pandemic, secondly, by the fuel prices. We putting all the possible efforts from the very beginning of both of those events. We activated our emergency measures to make sure that member states can quickly operationalize them and funds could reach fishers so that they would be compensated. I think we have put enormous flexibility, calling it unreceived profits, basically so that those funds could definitely reach fishers in order to save our sector. As regards the exports, that is for imports of food products, we of course have our ATQs, which these tax, they expire at the end of this year, and we are looking at them very carefully, especially as regards some of the countries which, for example, deprive our member states from the fishing grounds. We want, of course, a profitable and successful sector with the large landings, but we also have to look at the situation. We have well-established rules, and those rules under our common fisheries policy paid off. We see an improved situation in North Sea and Atlantic, and I hope that it will be a, at the end of the day, rewarding moment for our fishers. I hope we also will see even better situation in the Mediterranean, where we're finalizing our Western Mediterranean map. When it comes to countries and IUU fishing, Commission has zero tolerance policy towards IUU fishing. So all countries where we have reports on possible IUU activities, they either have a yellow card or very quickly, if they do not cooperate, it turns into red card, and that has been a very effective measure.
Yes, I'd like to add something over and above what the Commissioner said on the same question. Out of full respect and friendship, Spain and the Commission, as you know, Spain took a case to the court on the Commission's executive regulation from the point of view of the form, but also the substance. We felt that the Commission had gone beyond its competencies, and I say this full respect to the Commissioner, but Spain logically has to defend its own legitimate interests. But I would also like to say that there is one way of solving the problem, that is, have a review on the basis of scientific data and on the socio-economic impact assessment, which the Commissioner said is expected at the end of July. So we hope that this is a question of going beyond the original remit, that is by including longliners. So I just wanted to say this pro memoria, and I don't want to embark on a debate here with the Commissioner, because we have excellent professional and personal relations, but I just wanted to remind you of the Spanish government's position.
Hi, I'm Julien Giraud from AFP. I've got a question both for the Minister and the Commissioner on fishing limits. There is an ongoing discussion on the possibility of having multi-annual quotas for some stocks. I know that this idea is supported by Spain. So, Minister, can you explain why Spain is supportive of this idea of multi-annual quotas, and do you plan to have like a formal proposal or project presented during your presidency? And Commissioner, is the Commission open to this idea? Does that seem acceptable? And maybe are you preparing some proposal of your own on this effect? Thank you.
Want me to start? Thank you very much for your question. So Commission is always open for great ideas which fits into EU legislation. So this is one of the ideas which, of course, Commission responds. And if ICES if there is a possibility on certain stocks to provide a multi-annual.
The end of the agreement to export grain. What can you do about that? Well, I think it's quite clear. Not only did Russia illegally invade Ukraine, an unjustified invasion, but it is now using food as a weapon of war. A weapon of war has repercussions on the EU and developed countries because of the high price levels, but it also has repercussions on the less developed countries, which, according to the statistics, are the ones that are the main purchasers of this grain and oilseeds that come from Ukraine. I underscore this again. This is completely unjustified, just as Russia's position is unjustified. The European Commission and the President of the Commission yesterday was very clear about this yesterday, and we do hope that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the President of Turkey, who played a significant role as an intermediary here, we hope that they will be able to resolve the matter, not only to allow the grain to leave Ukraine, but also to provide supplies to many countries that need this Ukrainian grain. This war is a terrible war, but as we've seen right from the outset, there's always the food security aspect that has played a role. And we in the EU are absolutely committed to stand with Ukraine, to help Ukrainian grain leave Ukraine in order to combat this new front of war begun by Russia.
You want to add something about?
You answer as well. Okay.
Muchas gracias.
Perdón, una
Well, I'm sorry, if I could ask you a bit about the nature restoration law. I'm wondering what implications this could possibly have on trawler fishing. Here I'm saying this just because there are concerns about this in the fishing industry.
So nature restoration law does not have any impact on the trawlers. This is not part of the legislation. Of course, we just had a Parliament's position, which significantly, I would say, differs from the Council position. Tomorrow we start our first trialogue, and we'll try to get those positions closer together. But overall, on nature restoration law, I want to underline that it's not aimed to limit economic activities. On contrary, this is a way of combining nature preservation measures, not going beyond the limits, and ensuring that economic activities can happen on the same time. And many of the ideas that fluctuated around the law, if you really look at the legislation, they are not part of the legislation as regards the limiting one or the other activities, especially the bottom trawling concretely going into any of the gears. This is not what nature restoration law is designed.
If I may, I'd like to say something. And I would agree fully with what the Commissioner has said. Sustainability is something that needs to be looked at, and it's something that takes priority over profitability. We need to see what the real impact is here. The vote that we had the other day shows that this shouldn't be a party political issue of left and right, but it's something that no one can deny, that there is climate change and that we need to then be able to respond to what is happening. We've seen here that there was a defeat of the right in the European Parliament, and that should serve as a lesson for everyone. It should be food for thought that when it comes to these strategic issues, which are so important, which are there for the environment and for humanity, that we need to be able to find some common ground. I think the Commissioner has highlighted that very clearly. This was something that we saw in the European Parliament, but we saw in the Council as well. We had a positive result, which is good for the European Union, for the Member States, and for our societies. Great. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for covering this informal Council Fisheries meeting here in Vigo. I was talking about this with the Commissioner this morning and saying that we all do a lot of work in this area.